Have you ever played a video game you were enjoying more or less the entire way through, only to have the entire experience destroyed by a shitty boss fight near the end? Maybe you put 10, 20, 30 hours into this game, or perhaps even more. Sure, you might have gone through some challenges that weren't exactly exciting or even interesting at all, but you were still having a fun time overall with the game. Then that terrible boss fight shows up and makes you regret picking up the game in the first place. If you played Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, you may know which boss I'm talking about. Or maybe I spoiled it already in the thumbnail to the video, but since I'm writing the script before making the thumbnail, you're just gonna have to forgive me if that happens. But I think that's about all the hype you guys need for this adventure. It's time to meet the worst boss in Kingdom Hearts history. Some bosses are a pain in the ass because they're unnecessarily difficult, others because they're boring and offer little value to the overall experience. Now, one could argue there are plenty of bosses in Birth by Sleep that belong in one or both of these categories, and I would certainly not fight anyone on that. However, there is one boss with not only these qualities, but also several other extremely undesirable traits for a boss to have. That's right, we're talking about Terra Xehanort, or Terranort, both the final boss of Terra's story and the final boss of the last episode for Aqua. I'll be very, very clear here. This boss is horribly, terribly, disastrously designed. I don't even remember how many attempts I needed to beat him on my first playthrough, and maybe that's a blessing in disguise since I won't have to re-experience that initial trauma. My second time through, it was much more of the same. Death after death after death after death to this shitty boss. So going into this video, I had a very good idea of what I was in for. But this time, I wanted to do more than just fight the boss. I wanted to really analyze how it works to determine if it's actually as terrible as I believed it to be. Now, just so we're all on the same page, I fought this boss on Proud Mode with a level 31 Terra, and I'll show the skills I used during the fight on screen now. Before anyone gets any ideas, yes, I am aware these aren't really the ideal skills to be using. However, I tried to test this fight under normal conditions as best I could, meaning a first-time player likely won't know which skills are the best to be using and will probably just start the fight with whatever skills they have equipped at this point. Sure, I could have made things a lot easier by just looking up the most optimized build, but that would have defeated the purpose of even making this video. Damn near every boss fight in every game will be incredibly easy if you just look up the best setup and cheat the entire experience, so I didn't do that here. But I digress. The only other important thing to mention right now is I did have both Second Chance and Once More active for my first set of attempts, and yes, I said my first set. We'll get more into that later. Before the fight with Terranort actually begins, Terra is challenged by Vanitas and Xehanort simultaneously. This first section of the fight isn't that hard because while it is a 2-on-1, the only one who goes out of his way to attack you is Vanitas. Xehanort isn't much of a threat since he rarely closes distance to pressure you and uses very long-range magic attacks that are pretty easy to handle. So as long as you keep your distance, you can just focus on Vanitas. I beat this phase of the fight on my first try and only got knocked down to 1 HP once. After that, it's time to fight Xehanort by his lonesome. As an aside, can we talk about how unbelievably stupid it is that Xehanort has enough strength to block Terra's attack here with one arm while Terra is using both arms for extra strength? If Xehanort can do that, why the fuck does he need to possess Terra's body in the first place? For an old man, he certainly hasn't lost a step. Oh, and this scene where Terra unleashes his inner darkness is seriously badass. Anyway, the solo Xehanort fight is certainly harder than the first phase, but still not very difficult. Unlike when Vanitas was around, Xehanort actually will close distance to attack you sometimes, although he does this via teleporting since using his legs must be tough in his old age. However, his magic attacks hit a lot harder than before, and he can lift rocks out of the ground to attack you along with sending a wall of keyblades at you which can do multiple hits. Still, I beat this part on my first attempt without many problems. I wasn't breathing a sigh of relief though, since I wasn't expecting either of these fights to be problematic. I was steeling myself for the main event. After having his ass whooped, Xehanort uses the darkness inside Terra's heart to possess him and blah blah blah. I'm not gonna explain all this complicated plot shit. If I did, we'd be here all day. Kingdom Hearts has an incredibly sloppy narrative, and I could get more into what I think about that in later videos at some point, but we won't be covering that in depth today. All that really matters is Terra's lingering will survives Xehanort's attack and fights to defeat Xehanort to regain its body, thus bringing us to Terra's Xehanort proper. And I'll start by throwing in some clips to show you all how my first few attempts went. Yeah, this is going to be a touch more difficult, I think. I wish I could give this boss fight a compliment or point out some redeeming quality before I get into all the negative shit, but honestly, I just can't think of anything. This boss fucking sucks. He's the polar opposite of Xehanort in terms of aggression. The guy never stops coming after you from the instant the fight begins. You are going to be dodging and blocking all over the place just to survive long enough to take away a sliver of his health. Your opportunities to deal serious damage are few and far between. He's got quite a few attacks in his arsenal, so let's just go through them one by one. His most standard attack is an extremely long Keyblade combo that does a shitload of damage if you get hit by it. He can also use this attack repeatedly, so if you get knocked down to 1 HP and heal immediately after the combo ends, he can do it again and you'll be in the same situation 3 seconds later. Because of this, it's a lot safer to dash away first and then heal. Even then, this attack is incredibly punishing. If you're on a difficulty higher than standard, getting hit by this attack is often a guaranteed death sentence. It just does so much damage and you get stun locked the whole time once you get hit by any part of the combo, so all you can really do is wait for it to end, then hope you get a heal off before Xehanort ends you. The only reasons it didn't kill me nearly as much as it otherwise would have were, you guessed it, second chance and once more. Those skills will help you out more than once during this fight. There's also no consistent way to interrupt or defend against this attack. Guarding it regularly sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. This gets into another serious problem with this boss, but more on that later. Xehanort can also wrap himself in an aura of darkness and charge toward you repeatedly. Unlike the previous attack, this one isn't dangerous because it does a ton of damage or is difficult to avoid. In fact, of all of Xehanort's attacks, this one is probably the easiest one to dodge. The key issue with this move is how often Xehanort uses it. He's completely invulnerable while it's active, and just like with his standard combo, you can't consistently interrupt or defend against it. He just does it over and over and over again until he feels like stopping. Sometimes he only does it twice, and sometimes he goes 5 or 6 times in a row. This turns the fight into a massive waiting game where you're constantly dodging, waiting for the boss to become hittable again. And as I said before, you don't get very long windows to attack, so if you're too far from Xehanort when he becomes open or you don't react immediately, guess what? You're shit out of luck and you gotta wait for the next cycle. This really makes the fight drag, and every time you die, you're committed to dealing with another several minutes of this repetitive garbage. Xehanort also has a shot lock wherein he launches a hail of black orbs at you. This is another attack that can easily one-shot you if it catches you off guard. Each individual orb doesn't do too much damage, but combined they can melt you damn near instantly. That said, you want Xehanort to use this move as much as possible. If you guard against it, you can reflect the shot lock back at him, which does quite a lot of damage. Occasionally, the orbs will wrap around you and hit you from behind instead of coming at you from the front. Usually though, it's only a few of them and you can always dash away if you don't feel comfortable trying to guard against them. It is admittedly very irritating though when it does happen, especially if you die to it. Moving on, he can also rip up the ground beneath Terra to attack from below. The real danger of this attack is getting stuck in the air after getting hit and being a sitting duck for a devastating follow-up from the aforementioned attacks. Characters in this game can be incredibly floaty sometimes and can stay in the air for way longer than you want them to. You also can't guard while in the air, so that's not an option for limiting the damage you'll take. Once you get Terranort down to a certain level of health, he uses what I guess you could call his desperation move, for which he summons a large number of rocks into the air and hurls them at you from a distance. You can't damage him at all once he initiates this attack, big fucking surprise there, so don't even bother trying. Anytime you get close to him, he just warps away, so you'll never be able to do any damage. I know being immune during a desperation move is normal for Kingdom Hearts bosses, but since this boss in particular is immune to all damage 80% of the time, it just adds on to an already out of control problem. Getting back to the actual move itself, I have yet to figure out how to completely dodge this attack. I always find myself either dashing around hoping I don't get hit, or exploiting Cure Invincibility to avoid getting hit long enough to not die. Maybe I just haven't figured out the trick, but surviving this desperation move always feels like luck to me as opposed to skill. After using this DM, Terranort can also launch a big orb toward you that can do massive damage, but it never really feels consistent. There's that word again. I'm pretty sure it has to do with how close you are to the orb when it explodes, but there are times I'm rather far away and still take a lot of damage, and times when I've been really close and taken very little damage. I really don't know what the deal is, but as long as you aren't at point blank range when it goes off, you should survive. But despite everything I've covered up to this point, I've yet to mention the best move Terranort has access to during this fight, which is that he can heal himself. A lot. And I really mean a lot. And I don't think it's caused by anything the player does, it appears to just be random. And he can heal multiple times in a row. On top of that, there's nothing you can really do to stop him from healing. I would really love to take a trip down to Square Enix HQ and find out who made the incredibly dumbass decision to give this boss the ability to heal. Similar to his almost never-ending invincibility frames, this is another mechanic that drags out the fight and makes it significantly less fun, especially if you're dying a lot, which you probably will be doing. Spending a ton of time chipping away at Terranort's health only for him to heal a full bar in under 2 seconds makes me wonder if I should even keep trying. This seems to be another case of luck being far more impactful than skill. All you can really do is hope he doesn't heal during the fight, and if he does, hope he doesn't heal too much, since the more he heals, the longer it takes you to beat him, which increases the likelihood of you getting melted by one of his insanely powerful attacks or just getting comboed to death. To round out the moveset, he can also dive underneath the ground, then move under you to attack with the Hand of Darkness. This attack can't be guarded, at least not consistently, and dashing away doesn't always work either, since Terranort can just keep following you, wait for your dash to end, and then attack you, which is serious bullshit. Now, some of you might be wondering where I'm going with all this. Maybe you don't really think these moves are as irritating as I do, or maybe you think this type of challenge is just part of what a final boss should be. But this brings into question what I said earlier. It's one thing to have a boss with incredibly punishing attacks, but it's another issue entirely to have a boss with incredibly punishing attacks that cannot be consistently defended against. Terranort doesn't always respond in the same way to your actions, even when you're doing the same thing in the same situation. Remember his super long stun lock combo? Well, it is possible to guard against that attack. In theory. In reality, guarding has a 50-50 chance to screw you over. Sometimes guarding this attack knocks Terranort away from you, allowing for a brief counterattack, and the fight simply continues from there. But other times, he'll just keep attacking you as though you never guarded in the first place, leaving you a sitting duck waiting to be sliced into mulch the second your guard invincibility ends. Guarding should be something that is always reliable, something the player can always depend on. By taking that away, you actively punish the player for attempting to defend themselves, which is just terrible boss design no matter how you examine it. Adding on to this problem, Terranort really doesn't like being comboed. Getting more than 2 hits in a row on this dude is a major accomplishment, and if you do manage to get a full combo in, that might not be a good thing since he might just decide he doesn't want to get hit anymore and will start attacking you in the middle of your combo, which all but guarantees you're going to get destroyed. It's another completely unpredictable aspect of this fight. Sometimes your combos work in a way that makes sense, but just as often going for a combo actively puts you in more danger. The shot lock attack is really the only move Terranort uses that can be consistently guarded against, and when you consider the complete list of moves this boss brings to the table, those percentages don't look very good. Which brings us around to the core problem. This boss uses a lot of mechanics that are annoying individually but still manageable. When you put them all together, you get a shitty experience that is absolutely insufferable. You get a boss with a shitload of invincibility frames that does crazy amounts of damage, teleports all over the damn place, can heal whenever he feels like it, and has attacks that can't be consistently defended against. This is a fucking joke, and it quickly becomes too much for the player to handle. While recording footage for this video, it took me 18 attempts to beat this boss. 18! And let me remind you, this was with second chance and once more active. It also took around 45 minutes, but holy shit, it felt way longer than that. Every time I play this game, I remember why I hate this fucking boss so much. Now, one could argue the issues I just raised, while legitimate, are not limited to this boss fight. This is somewhat true, but not completely. This game does have challenging fights that don't rely on nearly as much bullshit as the Terranort fight does. There are many examples I could use, but I think the best one is Vanitas' final boss fight against Vanitas. For this encounter, I was at level 29 and I did not have second chance or once more, so I couldn't rely on clinging to 1 HP during the fight. Similar to Terra's final boss, this fight also has multiple phases, both of which are pretty challenging. Vanitas has quite a versatile moveset. He always starts the fight by jumping onto a wall of keyblades and riding them around the arena as he fires magic attacks at you. This attack can be pretty annoying, but there are several ways to knock him off the keyblades before he really drains your health. The real issue is how the camera can be extremely herky-jerk as it swings around constantly while trying to keep Vanitas on screen. And for anyone who says, just disable the lock-on, the whole point of a lock-on feature is to make an enemy easier to keep track of, not harder. If it's doing the latter, that's the developer's fault, not mine. So don't give me that bullshit. He can also go underneath the ground and move underneath you to attack. This move does a shitload of damage if you get hit by it, but as long as you roll non-stop while he's doing it, he'll never be able to catch up to you. You can even use long-range magic attacks to get some hits in when he's above the surface in between digging sessions. The only times this attack killed me were when Vanitas inexplicably decided to guard instead of continuing to roll, leading to me getting hit because this game has no animation cancelling and it definitely should have gotten animation cancelling. I'm not sure if this is an issue with the game not reading my inputs properly or if it was just my controller. I say this because I have played this game several times and I don't remember this being a huge problem before. A problem for sure, but not this frequent. Let me know in the comments if you also have that issue with this game. Vanitas has a shot lock similar to Terranort, but it moves a lot faster and doesn't split up as much. This attack also can't be guarded and can easily one-shot you if all the projectiles hit. With well-timed rolls, you can usually avoid it though, since the timing on when it comes toward you can be learned pretty easily. His most dangerous attack comes when you get him low on health. He can jump into the air and shoot blades of darkness at Vanitas. This attack is a little bullshit sometimes since Vanitas does it extremely fast and your window to react is very short. It also does a lot of damage and can easily melt you if you're not prepared for him to use it. What else is new? Not to mention, it's kind of unclear what the max range is for this attack, so there will be times you get hit by it when it really feels like you should have been out of range. That rounds out Vanitas' moveset for phase 1. The only other thing worth mentioning is his basic counterattack, which features him disappearing and reappearing behind Vanitas to attack. This move doesn't do much damage, but getting hit by it can feel pretty cheap since you're often stuck in an animation you can't get out of and you're just a sitting duck for Vanitas to wail on you even if you know the attack is coming. It took me 10 tries to beat phase 1 of the fight, but we aren't done because we still have to talk about phase 2. This phase shares a lot of its moves with phase 1, although some are slightly altered. He can also cloak himself in darkness like Terranort and rush at you, which can't be guarded, but as long as you roll at the right time, you'll pretty much never get hit by it. He also has a long, powerful melee combo, but it's not as bullshit as Terranort since it's actually possible to dodge out of this attack sometimes and avoid being stun locked to death. On top of that, there's always a brief pause between when Vanitas appears and when he actually starts swinging, so you have time to react and handle it appropriately. He can also shoot X-shaped projectiles at you, but these are easily avoided. By the way, does anyone else think it's incredibly stupid the special Keyblade formed by Ventus and Vanitas fusing doesn't get a unique name? Calling it the same thing as every other Keyblade that exists when it's supposedly way more powerful and way more important always seemed really stupid to me. Oh shit, I said I wasn't going to talk about the story anymore. Well, anyway, that's the extent of phase 2's moveset. But once Vanitas is down to 1 HP, the true last phase of the fight begins. I've seen many people complain about this part of the fight in numerous online forums and discussions, with some saying they rage quit and this part of the fight took them literal hours to beat. I don't think that has as much to do with this final part being hard per se. It's more that the game doesn't really tell you what you're supposed to be doing or even hint at it. The only information you get is "Finish him!" which is pretty confusing on a first attempt since hitting Vanitas normally does absolutely nothing at this point. What you're meant to do is use commands to clash with Vanitas to fill up his D-Link gauge and deal the final blow. I find the easiest way to do this is just waiting for Vanitas to initiate an attack, then shot locking him to fill up the gauge. While the game does automatically fill up your health before this final part starts, you can't heal during it, so you really don't have the luxury to screw around and get hit a bunch. But once you fill up the gauge, you can use Last Word and send Vanitas back to hell. I should mention, this final attack can also miss, and I think it has to do with being either too close or too far from Vanitas when you initiate it. And if the attack does miss, the D-Link gauge resets to empty, meaning you've got to fill it up all over again before you have another shot, which gives Vanitas a lot more time to kill you. It's pretty bullshit, honestly. And I say that as someone who really likes this boss fight. In fact, it's my favorite in the entire game. But it's not without its flaws for sure. It only took me 7 attempts to win, and overall this fight didn't cause me nearly as much frustration as the Terranort fight did. But the major question is, why? Why is one fight challenging but very manageable while the other is just cheap bullshit most of the time? Well, Vanitas shares a lot of the same qualities as Terranort, but they are considerably toned down. Sure, he has attacks that make him invulnerable to damage, but he doesn't spam them for 80% of the fight. Sure, he can be very aggressive, but there are times where he pauses and is wide open for a counterattack where he can be comboed pretty safely. He also can't fucking heal himself, so that automatically makes the fight 10 times better. But most importantly, Vanitas responds consistently to what you do, and once you attempt the fight enough times, you'll learn when the best attack windows happen and figure out how to exploit them to shorten the fight and win more easily. Against Terranort, this just isn't the case. Earlier I made a big deal out of having to use both Second Chance and Once More to beat him, and that's because this fight is damn near impossible to win without these abilities. Well, these two abilities and Leaf Bracer, which I also used against Vanitas. Without Second Chance and Once More, you are going to get erased over and over again by the boss's insanely strong attacks. I cannot imagine beating this fight without those two skills. I tried a few times but never made it very far and ran out of patience very quickly. In contrast, beating Vanitas without these skills is entirely feasible. It's a lot harder for sure, but it can still be done without having a perfect run where you make 0 mistakes. You'd basically have to achieve a flawless fight against Terranort under the same conditions to even have a chance of winning. And yes, I said a chance, because you just never know when he'll randomly decide to do something different from what he normally does, catching you completely off guard and killing you because you got hit by an attack that didn't give you any opportunity to do anything to save yourself. Winning against Terranort feels just as much luck-based as skill-based, and if anything, there are times when luck seems to be more important than skill. You can fight extremely well but still lose, or make several mistakes and still win because the boss suddenly decides not to do its usual bullshit. And this is why I consider it the worst boss in the game and arguably the entire series. Yes, worse than Ursula from the first game. That fight is really only hard because the controls suck ass. If not for that, the fight wouldn't be half as difficult as it is. This boss fight is terribly designed and definitely one of the low points of this game. Every time I play, I dread reaching the end of Terra's story because I know I'm going to have to face this monstrosity again. But what about Aqua's version of this fight? Well, I initially planned to talk about this depiction of the fight in a lot more detail, but there's really not much of a point since just about everything I said regarding Terra's version of the fight can also be said about Aqua's version. Terranort pretty much has the same moveset, and if anything the fight is easier with Aqua since she's more mobile than Terra. Sure, the second phase of the fight is different, but again it's easier since Terranort's not nearly as aggressive in the second phase, so you'll finish him off before too long. Okay, I think I pushed all the ranting I can into a single video. I can't stand this boss, it's fucking terrible, and I genuinely think it has a case for being the worst boss in the entire series. It's just that bad. But what do you guys think about this fight? Do you think I'm on point, or was I being too hyperbolic? I'd love to hear what you have to say about it in the comments below if you feel so inclined. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Yeah, fuck this boss fight.